Welcome to Testify. Today we give you a study on the book of Hebrews. Although we don't know the author of this book, we assume it was Paul or one of his co-workers like Barnabas, Silas, or Apollos. Whoever the author was, we know that he had a close relationship to the disciples of Jesus. The Hebrew community was facing persecution and imprisonment because of their association with Jesus, and that some in the community were beginning to abandon their faith. The author does two things in this letter to the Hebrews: firstly, to elevate Jesus as superior to anyone, and secondly, to challenge these believers to remain faithful to Jesus despite persecution. Hebrews chapter 1-2. Jesus is superior to angels and the Torah. In the past, God spoke to the Israelites in many different ways, but in these last days he has spoken to us through his Son. Chapters 1-2 compare Jesus to angels, which might strike us as a bit odd. But in Jewish tradition, it was taught that the Torah and the words of God were delivered to Moses at Mount Sinai by angels. So, by saying that Jesus is superior to angels, the author is saying that Jesus, and his message of good news, are superior to all previous messengers of God's word. Hebrews 3-4. Jesus superior to Moses and the Promised Land. Chapters 3-4 move on to teach that Jesus is superior to Moses, who led Israel through the wilderness, and built the tabernacle. Jesus is also a leader of God's people, but in him, we see the builder of not just a tent but all creation. The author retells the story of how the Israelites rebelled against Moses in the wilderness, losing their chance to enter into the rest offered in the Promised Land. It's from this point that the second warning comes. If Jesus is greater than Moses, which is correct, then how much higher are the stakes if we rebel against him? We are also in a similar wilderness environment, trusting in God for the future rest of the new creation. Let's make sure that we don't act like Israel did in the wilderness, losing out on God's gracious offer to enter that new world. Hebrews 5-7. Jesus superior to the priests and Melchizedek. Chapters 5-7 compare Jesus to Israel's Levite priests from the line of Aaron. The role of these priests was to represent Israel before God and offer sacrifices that atoned for the sins of the people. However, those same priests were morally flawed themselves, so they constantly had to offer sacrifices for their own sins as well as for others. Something more was needed, and that was an ultimate priest. The author says Jesus is that priest, but he didn't come from the line of Aaron. Jesus was a priest in the order of Melchizedek, the mysterious priest-king, a mysterious figure in the Bible, was both a king of Salem in Jerusalem and a priest of God Most High. Melchizedek came from an unknown genealogy, which could not be traced. He appears in the book of Genesis, meeting Abraham after Abraham's victory over a few kings. Melchizedek blessed Abraham and received a tithe from him, which is a tenth of his possessions. We are told that the Messianic king from the line of David would be a priest from the order of Melchizedek. The point is that Jesus is the ultimate priest. He is morally flawless and eternally available for his people, and he is superior to any other mediator between God and humans. With this in mind, the author warns the people that to reject Jesus is to reject one's only chance to be reconciled to God. Hebrews 8-10. Jesus superior to sacrifices and the covenant. This brings us to the last comparison in chapters 8-10. The author shows how Jesus' death on the cross was the ultimate sacrifice, vastly superior to any animal sacrifices offered in the temple. In the Old Covenant, those sacrifices had to be offered every day, and every year on the Day of Atonement. However, when Jesus offered his life once and for all, it was sufficient to cover the sins of the entire world. When we walk away from Jesus, it means we are turning our backs on God's gracious offer of forgiveness. Jesus' sacrifice is permanent, paid for once off, in which all sins are forgiven. He was the only one worthy to fulfill all the laws of the Torah in the Old Covenant. He is the atonement for our sin. Hebrews 11-13. An encouragement to stay faithful to Jesus. The final section is a big challenge for us to continue following him. Jesus is God's very word, our blessed hope, our eternal priest, our perfect sacrifice. It only makes sense that we should remain faithful to Jesus. The author urges these suffering Christians to trust that, despite hardship and persecution, God will not abandon his people. And we will leave you with that today. I hope you enjoyed this Bible study. Join us for more.